Skipster is the guest management platform used by top event teams for everything from guest lists to seating charts and online invitations. If you're looking for next generation event software that helps deliver perfect guest experiences, head over to Skipster's website. It's Skipster, ZKIPSTER.com to try a free event.
Are you a follower? Okay, so we're gonna be
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Hi, David.
Hey, Beth. Here we are, another GatherGeeks podcast.
Our guest today is Alison Slight, co-owner of Toronto-based production firm Candice and Alison. She and her partner were named to BizBash's list of the top 50 event designers this year, and we've covered their work on nonprofit galas, corporate work like our recent pop-up for the fashion brand YSL, and more. They just celebrated 10 years in business and threw a fun party for themselves. In addition to their work in Toronto, they work in Dubai, and it's not uncommon for top event producers to work all over the world. But David, we're going to hear about some of these cultural differences.
Absolutely. It was really interesting hearing them decide what was so different about working in the Middle East and working in Toronto and North America. Mm-hmm. And as you will hear, everything is decor, and over the top. Right. And kind of what they expect.
Exactly. So this is a great conversation from one of Toronto's busiest event professionals. And I'll tease the lightning round, David, that you do at the end, with her hot takes on invitations, first impressions, centerpieces, signage, gift bags, and more. And also why she thinks the Jennifer Lopez movie, The Wedding Planner, damaged the industry.
That's for
Let's
sure.
listen.
So Alison, welcome to GatherGeeks. We're featuring you guys on a photo shoot that we're doing on how event organizers spark change. And I wondered if you can first comment on what your thinking is when you go into a room and you go into an event and you see that people are one way when they come in and they're different when they leave. Do you actually see that?
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things about working in the event industry is exactly that, your ability to change people's perception of a pre-existing space. So, seeing how they kind of, maybe they've been to a space before, or maybe they've, have some precedent about what they think they might be walking into. But I think what the best part of, working in the industry is that you can kind of really, instill something in somebody that's different than what they have, preconceived. So yeah, I love that challenge in doing that, like really bringing them into an environment and constantly surprising them. So not just that first impression, but throughout the night, really having lots of different moments so that they leave excited and, feeling like they had an amazing experience.
I noticed on your website, you say that you've been creating buzzworthy events. Now, what does that mean today? And you guys have been in business for 20 years individually, you and your partner. What does buzzworthy mean today? Because it's hard to, there's no sort of standing around the water cooler anymore. Media's changed. Everything's changed.
Absolutely. So I think that buzzworthy really, it has evolved over the number of years that we've been doing this. I think previously it meant kind of, getting an event into the society pages or seeing your picture or seeing the pictures of all the beautiful people who attended. And now I think it's really about what is, the immediate impact of the event. And obviously social media has changed that. So you get an impression right away of what people sort of thought and how widely it got spread or shared. So yeah, I think that the buzz it's definitely the topic of conversation. And I think the other thing is how long it lasts. So when there's a really amazing event that lasts for, years and years, people still are talking to it and referring to it and mentioning it. When, they come to us for a new design, they'll say like, do you remember that party? That was such an amazing event. And I think that's a real sort of nod to the buzzworthy nature of certain events.
What are any common denominators that you see that have lasted the test of time?
I think there's a few events that just sort of hit this magic formula of, when all the stars align. So the weather was perfect. The room was really full for the whole duration of the night. There was a great surprise, maybe a performance or something that really kind of grabbed everybody. That wasn't something that they had seen necessarily before, whether it was talent or entertainment or some sort of bizarre catering aspect. But there's just this sort of, it rarely happens, but I would say, I've seen it maybe a dozen times where everything just kind of lined up perfectly, and it sticks with
even
people.
The same event. There's Bria Parker wrote the book on the purposeful events. She talks about how event is kind of like a river. You can do the same exact things, and it changes every single time. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think that's it. Like at the end of the day, every event has common elements. So it's how do you sort of shift them and alter them so that you make each of those elements special each time. And that's really the challenge.
And you also, I noticed that you also do business in Dubai. Tell us about what that means, and what's the difference between Toronto and Dubai, and different cities, or are we just people and it's all the same thing?
We are all people, and it is all essentially the same thing. I think the difference, Toronto, the market here has really grown, and I think that the industry as a whole is expanding, particularly because of what I mentioned before with sort of social sharing. I think it's a more important aspect of a, of a marketing budget or spend. I think people really see the value in that human experience now. So I think that generally speaking, the main difference I would say is the scale. Obviously in, markets like Dubai, where there's quite a bit of wealth and luxury brands that really invest in those areas because they have, key clientele there. They'll throw just larger scale events, and more frequently too, because I think the events that happen in Toronto are often of a social nature or a fundraising nature, whereas there it's really a large portion of many people's marketing budget.
And what is the difference though? Is there a different style that you see? What was the thing that surprised you the most that you weren't expecting when you started doing events there?
I think obviously it's more lavish. Yeah. So, in Toronto, I think it's a more of an understated kind of market in terms of design. The opulence and the grandeur that exists in the Middle East is something that is absolutely worth seeing and gives, event designers a real opportunity to do something spectacular. Not to say you can't do something spectacular in Toronto, but I think just when it comes to the level of design and the amount of things that are, essentially dressed and decorated, it's more significant there just because of culturally speaking, they like things that are really, really beyond.
What are some examples of some of the stuff that you come home and say, oh my God, I can't believe we did this?
Yeah. I have so many. I think really it's like literally dressing, decorating, thinking through everything, and every little piece of the puzzle. So, everything is decorated from a chair to a table to the ceiling to the room. It's really transformative, I would say. So quite a lot of the spaces are more like just open, big giant hotels or big giant convention centers that are bare bones. And you really have the ability there to essentially create a whole brand new venue inside a blank space. Unlike anywhere else where, you're structurally doing things, you're architecturally building things, and everything right down to the last detail is almost more customized.
So share some of any sort of really sort of out of the box stuff that you've done.
Really out of the box. So I think another point of differentiation is multiple days. So it was actually a wedding, and weddings there are quite different. Like as Candice and Alison, we don't do weddings as a big part of our business, but they are because, culturally, again, it's a very important part of the country. So weddings will be multiple days. So, you'll have day one will be, a very high level design in terms of decoration, like I spoke to, but then there's entertainment aspects. So one of the things that people always refer to our work as is we brought Kanye in to do a wedding for a group of 800 people over the course of 5 days. The Shaolin monks came in and they did all these types of performances. There were elephants. There was, rooms full of moet. Like, it just is really over the top extravagant, and that's not uncommon.
And budgets are completely sort of open ended, or they actually work with budgets.
Yes, I think different from Toronto, they are absolutely more open-ended. But again, it's just a different, the wealth that exists there, I think it's more like newer money. And so I think there's sometimes competitively, when people see one thing, the next person wants to outdo the next person. And that's also very common in that
How
world.
about the decision-making of the client? Is it based on, let's just do that? Or do they have to discuss and have committees with families, or is it pretty a different experience?
It's different in that it happens quicker, I would say. For social affairs in Toronto, people often take like maybe a year to plan it. The cycle is very quick, and so the decisions are made very quickly there. So yes, I think sometimes it's like somebody sees something and then wants something, and the decision, because the ability to, spend the money on those types of things happens very quickly.
How about the ability to produce something with a tight deadline? Does that happen all the time, I assume, there too? Fabulously, but fabulously. So you're willing, so people are getting paid for rush charges and things like that all over the place, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. And just like any market, I think you have to have a good network of suppliers that you can rely on to turn things around really quickly. So that's not different from Toronto, that, you need to have the good people in your back pocket. So when you need them in a pinch, they'll make it happen.
So do you
for you.
import people there, or do you use the people there?
Quite often there is people like there's production companies from France. Mm-hmm. Like there's a big network of people that come from there because they're used to, particularly when you're dealing with luxury brands. The designer will have somebody that they've worked with in the past, and they don't hesitate to bring those people in to produce it from an audiovisual perspective. Similarly with, models and things like that, that often gets flown over just because the resources that exist there aren't the same. When it comes to like furnishings and decor, that's often custom made if they can't get it brought in, but they will bring it in if they have to.
And this entertainment piece, is that pop culture from the U.S. primarily, or is it all around the world? Are they like Kanye? Obviously, they know our world.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a bit all over the world. So sometimes it'll be, a little bit of a American influence, but then they'll also have kind of multiple points of entertainment. So there will be some cultural things that happen, whether it's like a traditional dance or some sort of traditional, food and beverage aspect, and then sort of marriage with these international flashier.
And how about the generational differences? Are the millennials in there like our millennials here, or are Gen Z people? Is it in any way?
That's a good question. I don't know that I've particularly noticed a difference. There's obviously, it's a really mixed, like in terms of the people that are there, it's a very expat community. So not everybody that is in the region is actually a local person. So I would say that, yes, there's obviously commonalities that exist. And I think the millennial generation, they're really, jumping on that kind of wild train in terms of like the big, the flashy, they love all those sort of things as well. So, again, everybody loves shareability.
Right.
So the more, I think the crazier it is, or the more unique of experience you think you're getting, I think it resonates with everybody across the world.
And they have capital, so they
exactly.
can do it. So when you talk about luxury brands and things like that, what's the difference between luxury and the highest quality? Because some of the brands that you work on are not necessarily luxury, but there's a luxury experience, I would say, that people expect.
Yes.
Can you comment on that? On how you sort of, even though the brand may not be luxury, but the luxury experience is still the same thing people want, whether it's, Kmart or the perception of it in some ways, the aspirational aspects of it.
Yes. So Candice and I have always said that, despite not being necessarily a luxury brand, like you mentioned, we want to bring that sort of aspect of luxury to anything that we do. And to us, luxury really means, the quality and the details. And I think that is really a common element of any luxury brand. Everything has to be precisely the way that brand has created it. And deviating for that is what essentially cheapens an experience. So we always make sure that whoever the client is, we're bringing that sort of ideology to the table. We really want to make sure that throughout every touch point, there's an essence of not only the purpose of the event, but it really feels like the brand in which the event is for.
And also, it's interesting, though, that how aspirational is this luxury experience? I mean, it's because I was just at Dîner and Blanc here in New York City the other day, and I noticed that, the hipsters have kind of left it, but it's the common man that want to experience luxury, and everybody wants to have a taste of it.
Yeah, and I think it means a lot to different people. I mean, we're a little bit spoiled because in our industry, we get to see a lot of things and do a lot of things, and we're exposed to lots of beautiful experiences, essentially. But, when you think about the masses, the definition of luxury really changes. So, Dîner en Blanc is actually a good example because it is this big, beautiful production. But when you get down to the actual, bits of it, it is quite, a lot of it is self-generated. People have to bring their own tables and chairs and whatnot. But the end effect is something theoretically luxurious if you don't know anything different. So I think that, yes, it's aspirational, and I think people want to be a part of it more and more. But luxury means so many things to so many different people. So yeah, I think it depends who your audience is.
And the other thing that we hear today is everybody's talking about pop-up events and all these things. We've been doing pop-up events for years and years and years and years. Is that just a phenomenon because retail has changed so much right now, or how do you sort of talk about when you do I know that you do pop-up events, but what is a pop-up event today, and will it last?
Yeah, so pop-ups absolutely is a really growing category for, I think, anybody in the industry. I think it serves a few purposes. So many of the pop-ups that we do are for brands that may not have an existing retail environment. So let's say a beauty brand like YSL. There is no YSL beauty store. So it gives the consumer the ability to enter an environment that is created for them that they couldn't otherwise experience. And I think the temporary nature of a pop-up really gets people excited. So they jump all over it. They want to access it. And it is often really successful for the brand just because it is, kind of hyped up, and then it comes and then it goes away.
What's the cycle of a pop-up experience? Is it a week? Is it a year? Is it where does it sort of lose its diminishing returns, or where does it get to the diminishing returns is the question.
No, definitely. And it's a good question. I don't think there's a hard and fast answer to that. Quite often they're, over the course of a weekend, some last 6 months. I think it depends on what it actually is, but the more hype I think is generated, the more temporary it is. So if it is only, if it is under a week, I think that you'll get more, because I think after that, it becomes almost like a store. So people will know that they can go to it whenever they see it, but they don't feel the need to immediately get there. So if it's, I guess there's a question as to whether a pop-up is really an event or not, because it's kind of bridging, different worlds. Like you said, like retail, is it retail design? Is it an event? I think when it does fall into the category of an event is when it is, under a week, so that, that sort of programming can exist in a tight timeline.
And are you seeing your clients, are you recommending this to clients, or clients coming to you saying we want to do this at this point or because they see other people doing it?
A little bit of both. I think a lot of people are seeing it, and so they're wanting people to do it. But I think it's really, like say you're a brand that only exists online. It gives you the ability to, have people connect with the brand in a physical space where you may not be able to do that otherwise. So I think brands see the value in it, so they're often coming to us. But the challenge with pop-ups are you do need a more significant budget to execute it, because if you can't do it, and represent your brand properly, then it's almost not worth doing. You have to really dedicate. First of all, you have to find a space. There's, rental agreements. Like it's a much more cumbersome budgetary program. So people need to really set that aside and plan further in advance to execute something to the level that they really should be if they're willing to do
What's the reaction once you're done with this pop-up experience with a client that's never done a face-to-face? Are they like over the moon on the fact that they get to like see real customers and touch them? What is your experience on that? Always. So they want to do more once they do it.
Yeah, and I think there's a few purposes for it. That's really one of the main ones. But then they're getting people through, so they're registering people. They might be growing their customer base by doing this. It's people that one person goes, then they share the experience with others, and so it's I think something that there's multiple ways that people can benefit from it, but the client is always thrilled with it. But the biggest measuring factor of success for them is often how many people came through it. So the ability to sort of spread it is also very important.
And people still want to experience it. I mean, you don't see that going away at all. People are not getting bored with the concept of the pop-up store.
No, I think if anything, it's growing. I think that's something that's just expanding as time goes on and I think, we've been doing pop-ups for quite a while, and we did pop-ups before pop-ups were really a thing. So it was more challenging to find space and, getting a landlord who might have a vacant retail environment on a great street, just sitting there, knocking on his door, even finding out who the landlord was, knocking on his door, asking him if he'd do it. Back in the day, it was bigger hurdles. Now I drive down the street and I see signs in the windows of vacant spaces that say call for pop-up.
Yeah.
So
well, the retail has helped that. I guess it's destroyed the retail business. But
exactly.
So you also say on your sort of materials and the way you describe what you do is that you use house party rules. Give us an example of your house party rules. And I think I understand what you're getting at, but articulate it.
Yeah. So I think if you're inviting someone to your home, you sort of think of key factors. So you want to make sure that they have enough to drink. You want to make sure that there's food. You're going to turn the music up. You're going to have your lighting in your house kind of set to a tone that's going to make people feel comfortable and inviting. You're going to create environments where you don't think people are going to be awkward standing next to each other to have a conversation. You want to have multiple points of intrigue. So I think all of those elements apply to any event. So whether it's just having people over on a Friday night, or if you're throwing something larger, you really have to take those. It won't be successful. And I think if you let one of them slip or slide, and I think too frequently people think about, they focus too heavily on one thing and then ignore other things. And when you do that, you'll see people not want to stay as long, not feel as comfortable, and not make it as buzzworthy as you want it to be, because you want your guest to feel the most comfortable as possible throughout the experience.
Building a memorable experience for your guest means planning every detail right. Skipster is the guest management platform designed to help you create the perfect experience, from impressive online invitations to seamless check-in at the door. Get started at Skipster, spelled ZKIPSTER.com, for a free test event. So what's the priority? Like, if you had to follow, one or two rules, what would be the one or two rules that you would tell your client that this is house party rule numero uno?
Obviously, food and beverage.
Really?
That's an easy one. You really have to make sure that they're satiated, and if they're looking for something, that there's something there for them. And from my perspective, I think lighting is everything. And I think too frequently people, it's a basic thing. It's a simple element, but I think too frequently people mess it up, because I think that it really can change the environment and make people feel a certain way. And it has to evolve throughout the evening. Similar with food and beverage, it has to, evolve as the party goes on. So, as it gets darker, as it gets, or as it gets lighter, you have to kind of ebb and flow with the changing environment.
So I want to see if you agree with this statement. I believe that C-suite people are terrible hosts lately, that they don't know how to be the host. And we, as an event people, have to like convince them, or at least tell them to be charming and to be nice, and and it's not about, it's about the guests. And so I'm on this tear to try to get C-suite people to be better hosts. I don't know if you see that or not. And is that part of house party rules?
Yeah, I mean, I think hosting is another aspect of it. You have to, again, immediately make people feel welcome. Because I think there's still, even though they might be going to something exciting or fun or whatnot, I think there's always an aspect of, you don't know what you're walking into. So there's still a moment of like, is it going to be awkward, or who am I going to find immediately so that I can speak to? So if people are greeted in a certain way and treated in a certain way, the second they walk in a door, I think that aspect of hosting is absolutely crucial to somebody's the success of somebody at any
Is
event.
It our job to deal with I guess we are saying this, the problems of social anxiety? Because I think a lot of people have, we're sort of more outgoing, I think, and so,
Yes.
but most people aren't. How do you deal with social anxiety at your events to make everyone, we said feel comfortable a lot of times today? How do you do that?
So we play sort of back of the house when we're at an event. We don't like being, it's not about us at the end of the day. We're producing something for somebody else. But what what we keep our eye on when we are in an environment is exactly that. So if we see people sort of, gravitating towards one space or another, we can go over them and just sort of engage them and ensure that they are, happy and comfortable. I do think it's a responsibility. I think, again, at any scale, you really should be paying attention to how people are kind of, feeling. And there's things that you can do to sort of tweak it that aren't necessarily even verbal, but you can just sort of, lighting again is one of them. I think, music is a different one. You can really change people's mood or how they're acting by adjusting little elements like that, or, just bringing something to them as opposed to having them look for something. I think the audience is a living, breathing thing. And you have to sort of pay attention to that, because you can think people are going to act a certain way or feel a certain way, but until you actually see them in real time, you're not going to know. So I think, you're obviously paying attention to all of the things, the part of the production. But I think the people are really another part of that production. And so you just have to pay attention to them like you would any other aspect.
That's kind of why I think that we got to teach these the hosts to be hosts, to be conscious about being hosts. Because I think that for a house party rules thing, if you were doing your own wedding, you're going to go to every table and say hello to everybody. But sometimes at big corporate events or brand things, they don't think of themselves as that.
It's true. And I think that guests also, maybe they're there for a purpose, and maybe they want people to know that they've been there, because I think that there's so many events happening now that people bounce around from one thing to the next. And so I think it's important for a lot of guests to, say hello to whoever the host is, or, just let people know that they had been there. So being accessible and essentially being the host, like you mentioned, and being available, I think is an important thing. And, people often want to give you their impression of the event and say thank you. And so I think that you need to give them the ability to do so.
One of the things that I do now is that while I don't like the idea of formal receiving lines, I greet everyone at the door. And I do believe that sometimes people don't even meet another person when they go to an event. So it's like, I think there's a big frontier that we need to approach in our business a little bit.
It's true. And it's funny because with our 10-year anniversary party coming up on Thursday, when we did our 5th anniversary, we also threw sort of a big splashy party. And it's a tricky thing when you work in the industry and you're throwing something for yourself, because, you get it's your chance to do something that you really want to do. But as, guests were entering, Candice and I were near the door because there was a step and repeat, and we started to sort of receive a few people and welcome them. And we had no intention of creating a receiving line, but we couldn't get away from the door, because as people were coming through, everybody wanted to say hello. Everybody wanted to, thank us for having them. And, we wound up missing half of the party because of being stuck at the door, but it was so remarkable to see how much support there was. And I think that it is worthwhile. And I think people kind of entered with a different feeling, knowing that they had spoken with us, as opposed to trying to find us all
I think
night.
that's one of the things that people are adding to their I always say that saying thank you to people and talking to people doesn't increase the budget.
No.
And so people,
and it takes a lot of time.
It takes a lot of time.
It's important.
Exactly. So I want to play, I'm not sure whether this is Oprah or Barbara Walters, but I want to just come up with a series of words, and I want you to comment on what comes to mind as sort of rules and sort of advice to other people that are listening after 20 years in this business. So I want to. So whatever comes to mind. There are no wrong answers to this. Okay. So invitations.
Complicated. I think that invitations are always the thing that is easiest to get wrong. I think that there's, the details can get messed up, whether you're printing them physically and mailing them out, whether people get it in their inbox or it goes to their junk mail. Invitations are the most challenging element of the event.
Print or email?
Definitely with print, less so with email. But I think what people need to know is just because you distributed something doesn't mean anything. You have to invest the time to ensuring people received it, following up with them, and you have to buffer the number of people. If you want, 100 of the people in the room, then you better make sure that 150 or 200 people said yes, because things always come up and numbers always change. So save yourself the heartache of having an empty room and overfill it in order to ensure that it's a comfortable
follow-up calls. How much time do you budget? How do you sort of have you changed the way you think about that? Do you overdo that?
No, I think you have to do it strategically so that you're not bothering people, because I think that also has a negative effect. So I don't think there's any one rule for it, but I think you have to sort of see, again, I think an invitation list is something that is, again, a living thing. So if you're getting a very high rate of response and you find that, everybody wants to come, I think that sometimes people forget. So a follow-up call is worthwhile closer to the date, but you don't need to, have one person say they're coming 10 times prior to the event. I think a general acceptance and then maybe a follow-up to remind them is plenty.
Ideation.
So I think ideation is collaborative. That's what I would say about that. I think that, we all have ideas. We're all seeing lots of things. And I think that the best ideas come from dialogue with other people. So I think Candice and I produce the best events when we're talking to each other. And, I will see something one way, she will see it another way. And the best outcome is when we kind of combine those ideas in order to get a really unique product.
Inspiration. Where do you get it? How do you harness it?
Inspiration. So there's obviously kind of world leaders in the industry that, we look to, but I think for inspiration, too frequently people are just copying what they may have seen out there as opposed to taking something and reinventing it. I think we all have, great ideas and everybody's done some amazing work. So it's about really kind of looking at something and then applying it to your specific situation as opposed to just literally copying and pasting.
Check-in.
Check-in is a really important aspect. I think it's kind of your first impression and everybody should prioritize it because if they're waiting in a line or their name's not on a list or if there's difficulty getting in or if there's no valet or if it's raining, whatever the case may be, you're going to set the tone right from that immediate point of entry. So it's worth investing either more bodies or a more sophisticated system for your registration. I think that that's a very, very important aspect.
I heard of that Disney actually does stand-up check-in because they feel that it's more eye contact, which is interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think it necessarily has to be this big, intimidating desk with a dozen people standing behind it. I think it really can be, more fluid and inviting. I think people can kind of migrate down the line too. So it's not always, you don't have to get to this, front desk. You can have people kind of roam throughout it with list in hand, as long as they're, getting through the door efficiently. I think it's very important.
First impressions other than check-in.
Location. I think that people, when they receive an invitation, quite often will say, well, I'm going or I'm not going because it's here or there. So, you can really set the first impression from selecting your venue. I think the invitation design is also part of the first impression. So I think whatever the invitation looks like, whether it's digital, whether it's print, you're setting the tone for what the ultimate event design will be. So you should, again, create your design and then carry it through all of the elements. And your invitation is your first point of contact with your guests. So give them like a little teaser of what their ultimate experience
What about
will
first
be.
impression when they walk in, other than after check-in, let's say?
Okay. Well, make sure that there's food and beverage easily on hand, and very, you can get access to it within the first few minutes of being in an environment. Obviously, the design is going to be impressive, but people always gravitate right to the bar. So make sure it's nearby and well staffed.
How about with social media, people are going after the money shot, which is do you think about that? What is your money shot answer to this?
So we don't like creating one thing that everybody's going to take a picture of. So we, again, think that the event should be immersive and should be, everything, like wherever you're looking, you should be seeing something that's photo worthy. So there's obviously going to be, one element that might be more heavily decorated or designed, but people should be really taking a picture of the room as a whole.
Has that changed from working in Dubai? Or has it always been your philosophy?
No, I think that's actually more so the ideology. Okay. I don't think either of us like that overinvestment in one thing. Like, for example, the bad example is a flower wall, spending whatever it is, $8,000, $10,000 on this big flower wall. And then the rest of the event doesn't look great. I think that is a failure. I think you really have to consider all of the elements in order to make it really cohesive. Centerpieces, I think, are changing and evolving. Nobody really wants just a floral centerpiece, let's say, anymore. So I think it's really on us to come up with more creative ideas of how to dress the center of a table. Obviously, there's variables about sight lines, and budget is obviously a big concern when it comes to centerpieces too. So they're changing. I think they're becoming more engaging and actually interactive. Often they're, people are doing holograms and digital things and, printed, illuminated things. So lots of variety, and it's definitely a key element of change. The Staging is becoming more, again, technologically advanced and more of a design feature as well. So I think that if the purpose of your event is something where people are going to have their eye on a stage for a significant duration, then it's worth investing in.
Lighting, you talked about lighting. What is your sort of big piece about lighting?
It should feel balanced. It shouldn't feel too hot or too cold in any environment, whether that's too bright or too dark. I think that it needs to, not be something that is glaringly obvious. It should almost, feel very natural, but you'll only achieve that through essentially balancing the room.
How about signage?
Don't overdo it.
Understate. Okay.
Yeah, I think signage is, again, it depends on the nature of the event, but I think there's ways to have signage that's not like pop-up banners everywhere. We love decaling things and changing event elements that we're already going to be utilizing and making them essentially signage without being signage. So it becomes decor on some level, but the general rule of thumb is, you don't need a million logos everywhere.
Name tags.
Not a lot of our events have name tags, but I think they serve a purpose in certain environments. If it's a more corporate or conference or trade show, I think they're worthwhile, but they don't necessarily have to be, lanyards. You can be more creative there as well.
Client care at an event.
So we believe that clients should feel so comfortable in advance of the event that the day of the event should be an opportunity for them to enjoy it and engage with their customer. So they shouldn't have to worry about any of the elements that have gone into the planning or the production. They are there to be the host, as you mentioned. So I think that for us, it's, checking in with them, letting them, giving them little key kind of updates as the night sort of changes and or evolves, but really giving them the comfort and the confidence to enjoy it, because it's ultimately that the purpose of the event was for them.
So they're not the nervous Nelly types. At some point, you got to get them off that.
Yeah, and neither are we. And I think the more confident that you can be as a planner, the more confident your client will be. And that's often feedback that we receive, you're so calm the day of. But really, I don't know, everybody has this image of like Jennifer Lopez and the wedding planner running around with a headset on and clipboards in her hand and tripping over things. And that is like, that movie did so much damage to people in our industry, because that is not how it should be.
So how about speeches during an event, let's say a brand, a new product launch or something like that? What is your rule of thumb on talking?
I think it's harder to get people's attention, and I think people are coming in and out of events more. They're bouncing around, like I said, from one thing to the next. So I think it's hard to know when you're going to have the essential people in the room and really know that you're going to have their attention in that moment. So I think it is necessary in some circumstances, but I think that it should be brief, and you should enforce a mechanism to get their attention before you speak, or else it's sort of lost on the audience.
What's your go-to attention grabber?
Well, we just did an event recently. It was for an art gallery here. It was their annual fundraiser, and the curator of the gallery had to speak. And so, it was a room full of essentially 1,500 people, and so she had to, make a mark there. And how do you quiet a room in a party environment? It's very challenging without just like turning off the music. So we brought her in on a lift, so that she actually stood above the crowd. And it was a kind of a quirky, again, art-focused event. So, you couldn't help but, focus on her and listen to her in that moment. And then we quickly took her out. And she was afraid of heights, so it was a real challenge.
Does the giant work when you get the whole crowd?
No.
What does here we do the Star Spangled Banner or something? None of that really works.
Yeah, no. And, people, even if you're quiet, they're looking on their phone and whatever else. So it's really hard to get people's attention. So if you can, pre-record something and put it on, multiple screens or something like that, there's ways around it without having to, get people to look up. But, we advise against it. If you can get away with not doing it, then don't do it.
Length of cocktail hour, is it an hour or there's less?
It's an hour. I would say it's an hour. A lot of events only are cocktails now. Again, I think the sit down dinner is kind of, it happens for big galas and things like that, but people are moving away from it because again, it's hard to get people to commit to an evening. It's an hour when it's a gala event, but I think most events are sort of more cocktail.
But how if you do a dinner, how long should it be? I mean, do you do a plated first course and then, or do you go through the whole sort of French style service and things?
No, I think the less you hold people at a table, the better. So I think the ability to kind of move around is good. So if you can do a cocktail hour for an hour, like nobody shows up on time for galas and things like that. They kind of come in throughout that hour, and if they're seated. Nowadays, we're doing sort of 2 courses, and the third will be desserts or stations. The dessert will be like a more experiential portion of the gala, as opposed to like something that's, plated and holds you at your table. So I think, people are thinking differently about how, a more formal gala or more formal event takes place.
Let's jump to F&B, food and beverage. Are you seeing more interesting things, or do people expect more?
Definitely. And I think that it's an element that has become almost like decorative too. And it's, everybody's doing it for the gram, to be honest. So if you can change the way people engage with the catering elements, it's another opportunity for shareability. And I think that everybody wants something that, like the easy example is branding something or presenting it in a different kind of vessel, or, putting it stations. People love the decorative element of, sort of a station that they can take from and really kind of deconstruct, or that's something that evolves over the course of the night. Even we've done things that are like suspended catering elements. We're sort of known for one of the events that had an octopus chandelier that people actually had large scissors and they took from and ate, and it was a beautiful catering piece. So there's lots of ways to do it. And I do think that people are prioritizing and pushing caterers to be better and more creative as a result.
Social media. What comes to mind? First word.
I think it's, for our industry, I think that it is an asset. I think it's really expanded and exposed people to, events, because otherwise they may or may not have been a part of them before. So they may have heard of something, but they didn't really get that access. So I think it's giving people access to productions as a whole. And I think the industry is growing as a result of it.
Social media platform of the moment.
For us, it's always been Instagram, just because it's so visual. And so, we get a lot of, particularly with events, I think events get events because people see events and then they want to do events. So, the more visual, like the things that are, Twitter isn't really necessarily that applicable, because we want something that shows what we've done, and Instagram is the best platform. Smartest
way to, what do you do after the event, and what does the next day look like for you?
I think there's a few different things there, but we're always touching base with our clients. That's the biggest priority, to ensure, that there's an immediate kind of regroup of the pros, the cons, how we can make it better the next time, the successes, and, things that you can essentially adjust. I think that kind of debrief, and capturing that information in real time is really important, because if you talk about it, 2 weeks later, you'll miss it. You really need to sort of, revisit it immediately.
So confronting issues at that moment.
Yeah. And they're not always issues, but it's sort of like what really worked, what was really great. And it might not be the thing that you thought it would be. So I think that sort of addressing the really great things and the things that were surprising to you is really important to capture right away. And then for guests, if they attended, I think, again, that just getting that, images out, and they want to see it if there was a picture taken of them. So distributing those kind of information and those kind of images right away is more successful, because, again, it's kind of live. And then there'll be something the next day, and then it'll get lost in the shuffle, right? So you want to be sort of still fresh.
Let's say goodie bag. How do you respond to that?
People have FOMO about them. People love them. They love free stuff. And it's bizarre, because sometimes it's not that great. But yeah, I think people just love getting stuff.
Is that standard operating procedure for your stuff for the most part, or no?
No. And they're actually going away, because the time it takes to do them. It's people don't realize, when you have to do 500 gift bags with 10 things inside of them, it comes in a zillion boxes, and there's packages inside of packages. And so I think they're kind of wasteful. And I think people know that. And I think because people are getting a little bit more environmentally conscious, like the waste is not necessarily worth it anymore. So I don't think we haven't actually done gift bags. It's really, like, in the past year, we've seen a significant decline in that ask. So yeah, I think that it's a funny thing, but people always love free stuff.
So as we end, you're about to have your 10th anniversary.
Yes.
Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? What is the world going to look like? Just take a guess.
That's interesting. I think it's going to be, I just think that our world is growing, and it's going to change in a way that's, more and more spectacular. I'm going to use the word, because I think that, again, people want experiences now. And I think, unlike the past where, like I said, you may not have ever even had access to this, I think there's a growing level of access. And I think the types of events that are catering to, a variety of different people, it's really growing. So I think that there'll be more events. I think that there'll be bigger productions. And I think that the way we do events will change, in the sense that, again, the basic elements will always exist, but I think how we do it will be more sophisticated and more exciting as a result.
Okay, David, we're back in our podcast studio. Thanks for that conversation. I loved her insight that the audience is a living, breathing thing. So you need to react to them in real time. People are part of the production, she said. That's such a great reminder.
Yeah, no, I think
not set it and forget it.
Yeah, that's right. It's not like a scripted program. This is reality program at its best.
The other thing that stood out to me was the discussion on budgets, especially, they're willing to spend big money in Dubai and outspend each other as well. And then another point dealing with money was the trap of designing for social media. You can blow the budget on this big, beautiful flower wall created as Instagram bait and then really suffer with the design on the rest of the event. And that's a fail.
That's a fail. I think you're seeing, we've been hearing at some of our dinners and our things like that, talking to planners, that may be shifting a little bit.
The need to be more balanced as well. Like
yes,
you can't put it all in one place.
Exactly. So Beth, what's going on at BizBash?
It's officially August now, our first podcast in August. And so maybe our listeners are planning end of summer parties, intern or summer associate send-offs, company picnics. And we've had a lot of summer entertaining stories recently. So some fresh content on making your pool party better, or new decor and catering ideas. So as we wind up the summer, take a look at that for your events.
Fantastic. So as we end our podcast, we'd like to thank the people that bring us all of the great work that we're hearing today, and including our editorial duties head and various other titles, Claire Hoffman, who is our savior, and Rebecca Pappas, who gets it out to everybody, and Dave Nelson, our producer. So what do we say, Beth?
Gather on.
Gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on.